Good morning, and welcome to the second message in Marked Understanding Our Call to Discipleship. It's a series we're doing at New Hope Community Church. I'm Pastor Bruce Razengatta. Welcome to my office. We're glad to have you here with us connecting and hope you are journeying well in your walk as a disciple. So, we want to talk this fall a lot about what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. We're doing it by focusing on the calling stories in the Gospels. For many people, they think of the calling stories, and then we think of one or two of them. They remember that, oh yeah, Jesus called us to be fishers of men, and oh yeah, he called us to follow him. But there's so much more. It's so deep, it's so rich, this call to discipleship, what it means in our lives. What we want to do as we go through this period of time is we want to unpack the significance of what it means to be a disciple. So here in week 2, we're going to focus on one of those early concepts of what it means to be a disciple. And we want to take you on a journey this week focusing on the idea, the call to follow, listening versus following. Most of us at some point or the other in our life has probably played the game Follow the Leader, that kids game. The largest follow leader game that ever took place had 768 participants. It was in Salt Lake City, Utah. It occurred on November the 10th, 2015. In Leadington, Michigan Harbor, they have in a city park a series of bronze statues of kids hopping from one set of stones to the other, simply playing follow the leader. This game reminds us that at the heart of being a disciple is following, not merely listening to Jesus. Now, I want to focus on that today as we dive into some scripture because it's important. It's important to realize that there's a big difference between simply listening and following. So I'm going to be in a number of passages in the New Testament, but there's kind of like where we're going to end up in these gospel stories is we're going to end up in a passage that's in Matthew chapter 8, verses 8 to 22. I want to read that now. We're going to look at some other scriptures and we're going to come back to this. So let me read it to you. Matthew chapter 8, verses 18 to 22 says this. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came in and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replied, Foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Another disciple said to him, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus told him, Follow me, let the dead bury their own dead. You see, when it comes to following as a disciple, there's a number of truths we have to remember that influence our understanding of what it means to follow as a disciple. The first thing I want to remind us all of is that wherever Jesus went, Jesus always drew a crowd. I mean, because of the crowd, they had to make an opening in a roof so that friends could lower a lame man down to be healed. There were times where Jesus would simply go out onto the lake into a boat because a large crowd had come to him and were pressing him to teach. Sometimes Jesus would retreat on the lake and get away from a crowd just because they followed him. Sometimes Jesus would be in a house and a crowd would gather outside, and he's just trying to get something to eat with his disciples, but he's not able to even eat. There were other times that a crowd would gather around him and he'd be at the water's edge and he would just get in the boat and again teach and teach again. Wherever he went, Jesus always drew a crowd. Now, we should expect this. We should expect that if New Hope Community Church and all of its expressions, whether it's Word of Life, Presbyterian congregation, whether it is Nueva Esperanza or Hispanic congregation, whether it's Celebrate Recovery, if we're doing a good job of lifting Jesus up and people are encountering who Jesus is, we should expect that people are going to be drawn to him because that's just what Jesus does. He draws a crowd. We should expect that when Jesus is lifted up, people will hear he is moving in our midst. And other listeners will invite others to simply come and see what God is doing. So, the first truth to remember, is that Jesus always tends to draw a crowd. But then I want to talk about the crowd itself. The crowd typically wants something of Jesus. They're drawn to Jesus because they're looking for something. Often it's healing, or it's hope, or it's renewal, or it's freedom. I mean, this is easily seen in another calling story. This is seen in another story about the crowd in Matthew chapter 4, verse 23. It says this: Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness among the people. And news about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering with severe pain, the demon possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across Jordan followed him. The pain of this life is often the door that people first approach Jesus through. The crowd is often drawn to Jesus because they're looking for hope, healing, renewal, or freedom. They want something that the forgiver has to offer. You see, the broken, the hurting, the challenged, the chained, who among them are you inviting to discover the healer, the redeemer, the chain breaker? The crowd wants something from Jesus. We understand that, and we invite them to discover it. So, the first two truths are about the crowd. Jesus always draws them, and then that the crowd is always looking for something from Jesus. But the next truth is this: disciples are drawn from the crowd into a deeper relationship with Jesus. It's very clear in Scripture that the crowd and disciples are two different groups. Here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, let me read this to you. It says this: Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to them, and he began to teach them. Did you catch that? When Jesus saw the crowds, once again, there's the crowd. He always draws a crowd. They've come seeking. They want help for their wounds. They want healing. They want redemption. They want the chains to be broken. But he goes up on a mountainside. He moves away from the crowd. And then it says this: his disciples, a different group, comes with him, and he began to teach them. We should never assume that just being a part of the crowd is what Jesus wants for us. We should never assume that that's it. That just listening and hearing, knowing that he does amazing things, that's enough. That being a disciple, being marked with his thumbprint, is much bigger, it's much more significant. The third truth is this: Jesus draws disciples from the crowd, and he calls them into a deeper relationship to learn more. Truth number 4: Jesus expects more than listening from his disciples. Now we go back to that initial passage, which seemed to have such a unique couple of stories in it. But I want you to see that now these are the individuals that Jesus are seeing as disciples. He's called them out of the crowd to discover more. He's called them into something else. And he is going to expect more of them. And we see it in both of these passages. First, Jesus expected more than listening from his disciples. Let me read this again from Scripture. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. So once again, the crowd's there. Jesus actually leaves the crowd behind. Some of the disciples follow. Some people wanting more follow. Some who've been called to follow are there. And then some are volunteering to follow, because it says this in verse 19. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, Rabbi, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says the most perplexing thing. He says, foxes have dens, birds have nests, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Jesus was teaching, Jesus was stating that the expectation for disciples was going to be greater, that discipleship would alter priorities. For most of us, the priority about having a place to rest our head, a den, a home, a nest, the place that you live, that's our prime priority. Here at this point, Jesus takes it right out. He says, look, foxes have dens, birds have nests. Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He's pointing to a different set of priorities. What Jesus was calling to was something different. Discipleship was about to trump convenience. That's tough for us. You see, it's easy to compartmentalize our journey with Jesus. It's easy to think, well, church is what I do on Sunday, and then 6 days I live the rest of my life. But discipleship is different. Discipleship is, well, I'm a disciple 7 days a week, and one of those days I often go to church. But I'm a disciple in my home, and I'm a disciple in how I use my home. I'm a disciple at work, and I'm a disciple in how I take advantage of my work to advance the kingdom. Discipleship trumps convenience. Discipleship alters priorities. Jesus expected his disciples to be doing more than just listening and showing up. He wanted more. My question to you would be this: how is Jesus challenging you to change your priorities? We can't expect to follow him and have it merely be at our convenience, because discipleship will always trump convenience. There's one last truth about this call to follow, the call to do more than just listen. Jesus envisioned being the prime concern of his disciples. In the second half of that first passage that I read, starting in verse 21, it says this: another disciple. Again, now Jesus has drawn away from the crowds. He's gone up on the mountainside. Disciples have followed him, and others who want to be disciples, others who are beginning in their journey as disciples are there. Here, another disciple says to him, Lord, let me first go bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me. Let the dead bury their own dead. Wow, that almost seems heartless. Didn't Jesus care that this man had lost his father? No, what he was stating was simply this: to be a disciple, to be marked with his thumbprint on our lives, it would mean that Jesus would become the prime concern of our life. That when anything happens in our life, Jesus is a part of it. Jesus is in the midst of it. The idea that, well, Jesus, I'll be a disciple. Let me go deal with this first. The idea that Jesus didn't want to be a part of whatever was going to take place in that funeral ceremony, all that, it's not accurate. If we understand following, it means this: 24/7 in our life, Jesus is the prime concern. We've stated in the core series that it's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. He will be the focus of our worship. He will be the thesis of our theology. We have stated this: he will be the motivation of our service. Jesus is saying, if you are my disciple, it will be all about me. My question to you is, have you limited what God is allowed to ask of you in your relationship with him? Has he become merely an add-on app in your life? Or is he truly prime concern? As we journey forward in our understanding of what it means to be marked as his, this call to discipleship, we have to understand that it's always going to be more than just showing up at a study or going to church on Sunday morning and listening. Jesus is going to call us to much more. He wants to be the prime concern. Jesus wants to alter our priorities. He wants to remind us that his discipleship will trump the convenience in our life. He's Lord, and he will use us and challenge us in what ways he wants to, and he will expect us to impact the kingdom. We are his. We're followers. I'm Pastor Bruce Razengatta. I'm lead pastor at the New Hope Community Church here in Northport. We meet on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. We have a Hispanic congregation that meets at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. We have an affiliated Presbyterian congregation, Word of Life, that meets with us at 11 a.m. Celebrate Recovery, another congregation filled with vibrancy and worship and seeing God break chains and the habits in their life. They meet on Tuesday nights. Whatever service you're a part of, we invite you to come and discover what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Thanks for listening today. Blessings.